Biodiversity, the variety and variability of life on Earth, underpins the very foundation of our food systems. Its importance to food security, defined as the availability, access, utilization, and stability of food for all people at all times, cannot be overstated. The intricate relationships among species, ecosystems, and genetic resources create resilient agricultural systems, safeguard nutrition, and buffer humanity against environmental shocks. As global challenges such as climate change, population growth, and resource depletion intensify, preserving biodiversity emerges not only as an ecological imperative but also as a prerequisite for sustainable food security. At its most fundamental level, biodiversity is the wellspring from which all of humanity's food originates. The domestication of plants and animals was made possible by the rich tapestry of wild species and genetic diversity available to early humans. Over millennia, through selection and breeding, a vast array of crops and livestock breeds evolved, each adapted to specific climates, soils, pests, and cultural preferences. This diversity has allowed farmers to tailor their production to local conditions, providing the world with thousands of edible plant species and countless animal breeds. Today, however, just a handful of crops, rice, wheat, maize, and a few others, dominate global diets, rendering the food system increasingly vulnerable to threats. The erosion of crop and livestock diversity narrows the genetic base, diminishing our capacity to adapt to new challenges. Genetic diversity within crops and livestock is crucial for resilience in the face of pests, diseases, and environmental fluctuations. When a pathogen or pest attacks a genetically uniform crop, it can devastate entire harvests, as exemplified by the Irish potato famine in the 19th century. The famine was precipitated by reliance on a single potato variety that proved susceptible to blight, leading to catastrophic crop failure and mass starvation. In contrast, fields planted with a mosaic of varieties or species are less likely to suffer total loss, as some individuals possess resistance traits that enable survival and recovery. This principle holds true across agricultural systems. Diversity acts as insurance, spreading risk and enhancing the ability of food systems to withstand shocks. Beyond resilience to biotic threats, biodiversity equips agriculture to cope with abiotic stresses such as drought, salinity, extreme temperatures, and flooding, all of which are projected to intensify with climate change. Wild relatives of crops harbor genes conferring tolerance to these harsh conditions, offering invaluable resources for breeding climate-resilient varieties. For instance, wild wheat and rice species have contributed genes for disease resistance and drought tolerance to modern cultivars, bolstering yields and safeguarding food supplies. The conservation of wild species and traditional land races, therefore, is not merely an academic exercise but a strategic investment in future food security. Nutrition security, a component of food security, is intimately linked to biodiversity. Diets rich in diverse foods promote health and prevent malnutrition, yet the global trend toward homogenized diets undermines this benefit. Traditional food systems, often sustained by indigenous peoples and local communities, draw upon a wide range of edible plants, fruits, nuts, seeds, and animal products. These foods supply essential micronutrients, vitamins, minerals, and phytochemicals that are often lacking in staple-based diets. For example, leafy greens, pulses, tubers, and minor cereals contribute iron, zinc, vitamin A, and other nutrients vital for growth and immunity. The erosion of agrobiodiversity, driven by industrial agriculture and market forces, restricts dietary options and exacerbates hidden hunger, the chronic lack of micronutrients affecting billions worldwide. Ecosystem services provided by biodiversity are indispensable for food production. Pollinators such as bees, butterflies, birds, and bats facilitate the reproduction of 3/4 of the world's food crops. Soil organisms, from earthworms to mycorrhizal fungi, decompose organic matter, recycle nutrients, and maintain soil structure and fertility. Natural enemies of pests, including predators and parasitoids, regulate crop-damaging populations, reducing the need for chemical pesticides. Wetlands, forests, and grasslands buffer water flows, prevent erosion, and moderate microclimates, creating favorable conditions for agriculture. The loss of these ecosystem services due to declines in biodiversity can have cascading impacts on yields, farm incomes, and ultimately, food availability. Cultural and traditional knowledge associated with biodiversity further strengthens food security. Indigenous peoples and local communities have developed sophisticated systems for managing and utilizing diverse species, often in ways that enhance sustainability and resilience. Practices such as intercropping, agroforestry, rotational grazing, and seed saving rely on intimate knowledge of local biodiversity and ecological processes. These systems not only provide food but also preserve habitats, sequester carbon, and sustain livelihoods. The erosion of traditional knowledge, alongside biodiversity loss, threatens the adaptive capacity of food systems and undermines the rights and food sovereignty of marginalized groups. The economic dimension of biodiversity's contribution to food security is equally significant. Diverse farming systems tend to be more stable and less dependent on external inputs such as fertilizers and pesticides, reducing costs and risks for smallholder farmers. Crop diversification can open new markets, enhance income streams, and cushion farmers against price fluctuations. Moreover, genetic resources conserved in situ, on farms, and ex situ, in gene banks, represent a public good, supporting research, innovation, and the development of improved varieties. The value of these resources becomes apparent during crises, such as outbreaks of new pests or diseases, when rapid access to diverse genetic material can avert disaster. Despite its critical importance, biodiversity is declining at an unprecedented rate due to habitat destruction, pollution, overexploitation, invasive species, and climate change. Agricultural expansion and intensification are major drivers, leading to monocultures, the loss of wild habitats, and the replacement of traditional varieties with high-yielding but genetically uniform crops. This paradox, where agriculture both depends on and threatens biodiversity, highlights the urgent need for transformative change in food systems. Sustainable agricultural practices that conserve and enhance biodiversity, such as organic farming, agroecology, integrated pest management, and conservation agriculture, offer pathways to reconcile food production with environmental stewardship. International frameworks and agreements recognize the centrality of biodiversity to food security. The Convention on Biological Diversity, CBD, the International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture, ITPGRFA, and the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, all emphasize the need to conserve, sustainably use, and equitably share the benefits of genetic resources. National governments, civil society, and the private sector have roles to play in implementing policies, investing in research, supporting community-based conservation, and fostering fair markets for diverse foods. Education and awareness raising are vital to shift consumer preferences and valorize the rich heritage of agrobiodiversity. The challenge of feeding a growing global population, projected to reach nearly 10 billion by 2050, cannot be met by simply increasing yields of a few staple crops. Such an approach risks deepening the vulnerability of food systems to shocks and stresses, while exacerbating environmental degradation. Instead, a paradigm shift is needed, one that values and harnesses biodiversity as the foundation of resilient, nutritious, and sustainable food systems. This entails protecting wild habitats, restoring degraded ecosystems, revitalizing traditional agricultural landscapes, and promoting diversified diets. Urbanization and globalization have contributed to the disconnection between people and the sources of their food, further marginalizing biodiversity-rich food systems. Urban consumers often have limited access to traditional foods, and market infrastructure tends to favor standardized, mass-produced commodities. However, there is growing recognition of the value of local and indigenous foods, both for their nutritional qualities and their role in sustaining cultural identity. Initiatives such as farmers' markets, community-supported agriculture, and farm-to-table movements are helping to reconnect producers and consumers, stimulate demand for diverse crops, and incentivize conservation. Climate change presents perhaps the most formidable threat to both biodiversity and food security. Rising temperatures, shifting rainfall patterns, and increased frequency of extreme weather events are already impacting crop yields and food availability. Biodiversity offers the tools to adapt, through the selection and breeding of tolerant varieties, the maintenance of diverse agroecosystems, and the restoration of ecosystem services. Yet, adaptation strategies that ignore biodiversity may prove short-lived or counterproductive, locking food systems into ever narrower genetic bases and greater dependence on external inputs. Equity and social justice are integral to the relationship between biodiversity and food security. The benefits of biodiversity are not distributed equally. Marginalized groups, including smallholder farmers, women, and indigenous peoples, often bear the brunt of biodiversity loss while contributing least to its causes. Empowering these groups to steward biodiversity, secure land rights, and participate in decision-making is essential for equitable and effective food security strategies. Gender-sensitive approaches recognize the unique knowledge and roles of women in conserving and utilizing agrobiodiversity, particularly in seed selection, preservation, and exchange. Technological advances, such as genomic sequencing, gene editing, and digital agriculture, offer new opportunities to conserve and utilize biodiversity for food security. These tools can accelerate the identification and incorporation of valuable traits from wild relatives, improve monitoring of genetic diversity, and support precision agriculture. However, technological solutions must be embedded within broader frameworks that respect ethical considerations, safeguard traditional knowledge, and ensure equitable access to benefits. Education and public engagement are critical levers for change. Raising awareness of the links between biodiversity and food security can influence consumer choices, drive policy reforms, and foster a culture of stewardship. School gardens, culinary education, and citizen science initiatives can inspire new generations to appreciate the richness of local foods and the importance of conservation. Media and storytelling can amplify the voices of custodians of biodiversity and celebrate the diversity of food cultures around the world. In conclusion, biodiversity is not a luxury or an optional extra, it is the bedrock of food security. Its contributions span genetic resources, ecosystem services, nutrition, resilience, culture, economy, and equity. The loss of biodiversity threatens the stability, productivity, and sustainability of food systems, while its conservation and sustainable use offer hope for a future in which all people have access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food. Meeting this challenge requires concerted action across scales and sectors, from farmers' fields to international treaties, from local markets to global supply chains, from classrooms to parliaments. By valuing and investing in biodiversity, humanity can secure the foundation of its sustenance and build food systems capable of nourishing both people and the planet for generations to come.